Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We'll get started in just a little bit. We're so happy you could be here today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. If you want to put your name and your organization and where you're zooming in from in the chat, that would be great. Thank you, Emery, for starting us off from the Maine Environmental Ed Association. We'll get started in just a little bit. We just have a few intro slides as everybody is joining. Welcome, welcome. Nice to see everybody. We have New Mexico and we have Sacramento, South Carolina. Great to see everybody. We'll get started in just a few minutes, letting people join. We have a great webinar today. And be thinking about the questions you have about crisis communications. So hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today. You can keep adding your name to the chat and where you're calling in from. My name is Judy Browse. I'm the Executive Director of NAAEE, and we really are excited to see you here today because I think you're going to see a really wonderful webinar. And today's webinar, as I hope you know, is Planning Against Panic. And it's all about how to plan for when a crisis comes up, and it's whether it's in your organization or your school or an event that happens in the world, and you're trying to figure out if and when to say something or do something and how you think about that. And we couldn't have a better person to help us think through this than Kristen Grimm. I'll introduce Kristen more fully in a minute, but she is the guru of strategic and crisis communications. So thanks to everybody who sent in questions in advance of the webinar, and Kristen will be able to address many of these in her presentation, and will also answer questions throughout the webinar and at the end. And the idea of the webinar came up as many organizations were trying to figure out when they should get involved and say something if there's a school shooting, or when the war broke out in Gaza and still going on, the growing attacks on the LGBTQ plus community, banning books, all those things. When do you get involved? And we had a lot of questions about when to get involved, what your board wanted to do, or what decision makers wanted to do. And so this webinar is about helping us think through that and actually thinking about planning in advance. So thank you, thank you. And for those of you who are new to our webinars, we do try to highlight new ideas, new thinking in our field, and to have a chance to bring in amazing speakers like Kristen to help us think and learn and keep growing all the time. So thanks also to our affiliate network and our co-hosts for this webinar series. They are wonderful. If you don't know about your state, regional, or provincial affiliate, you can look on our website and find out more. All are working to advance environmental literacy across North America. And a big thank you as well to EE360 Plus and US EPA for all that they do and all we're trying to do through EE360 Plus to advance environmental literacy and strengthen the field of environmental education. Just remember that this is a webinar, so you're all muted, but you can talk to us all the time through the chat with questions, ideas, resources. So feel free to use the chat throughout. And you can also click on the closed captioning if you need help. You can choose from, because of the upgrades, 31 different languages to help you make sure you understand what's going on if you're if English isn't your first, second, or third language. And a big thank you to Carrie, who is our social media and communications coordinator. Carrie helps with all aspects of the webinar series and does so much on our communications team with social media, analytics, and so much more. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Kristen Grimm, who is the founder of Spitfire Strategies and a strategist there, and who many of you know because she has helped NAAE through a number of crises over the years. And I don't know if some of you remember the webinar she did during our pandemic, the early years of the pandemic, the early months, to help us figure out what we all should be doing, saying, thinking. So helpful. And so thank you for that, Kristen. And just a few words about Kristen. Here's just a little bit about her, but I cannot say enough great things about her. In 2002, she decided that the world needed more women-run companies. So she started Spitfire Strategies. Her first order of business was to democratize the knowledge about how to create a strategic communications plan so that lots of organizations can harness the growing power of communication to make the world a better place. And so she's worked with thousands of nonprofits and foundations and agencies around the world to share the tips and tricks to help us all do smarter and more strategic work. She's also the brains behind Spitfire Smart Chart. She'll probably talk about that, Planning to Win, and so many other resources that are so helpful. So she is so quick on her feet, and it is my honor and pleasure to turn this over to Kristen. Welcome, Kristen.
Hi, everybody. I am so glad that we're all on the phone today. I think just being on the phone is probably a great way to be thinking about rapid response and crisis. So just thinking about it when you're not in it is already the right step. So what I'm going to do today is talk about how do you plan against panic, because nobody wants to panic and there's no reason to. And there are pretty straightforward steps, I will say. It requires a lot of thinking and a lot of coordinating with colleagues, but you really can plan against panic. So I'll walk through this, and in a few places I'll stop, just see if there's questions, but also put them in the chat. Judy and Carrie are definitely going to note when there's, hey, we need to stop and talk about this. So that's what I'm here for, is to make sure you all feel really confident about not panicking. I feel perfectly confident and rarely panic because I follow these steps. So let's get into it. I'm going to talk both about rapid response and crisis, and they're different. And there's 3 rules of thumb, though, that go with both of them. And the first is to anticipate and think ahead. It is unlikely that something will happen you've never thought of before. So you might be really concerned that an employee embezzles money. That could happen. It happens all the time. There could be a war. That also happens. Somebody can outlaw the word equity in their state legislature. That also has happened. So we actually know a lot of things, even if we hope they never happen, and we like to treat them like Voldemort, like if I don't say them, they won't, but that's not how it works. So we really do want to anticipate and think ahead. Like, if that were to happen, what would we do? And it helps a lot to then play it out. We'll role play it out. Well, what would we say? Who would we say it to? How would we say it? On what platforms? Because as you do that, it just gives you a sense of control, which is like, oh, I sort of thought this might happen and we have already thought it through. And then you want to actually follow the process, because of course, when you're in the middle of it is when you'll get more emotional. So today we're going to really think rationally, and none of us have our heads on fire, because otherwise we wouldn't be on this call. But sometimes when you're in the middle of it, all the emotions get high. And that's really when you have to say, hey, let's actually follow that process that we came up with when we had really cooler heads. So those are the big rules of thumb. If you don't know anything else after this webinar, keep that in mind. This is what keeps you under control the most. So I do always remind people that rapid response is different than crisis comms. And so let's take a look at some examples. So is this rapid response or is it crisis? And let's have you put it in the chat. What do you think it is? Rapid response or crisis? Okay, Emery thinks it's rapid response. Annalie thinks it's crisis. Holly says crisis. All right. And the answer is, honestly, it depends who you are, right? If you are the owner of this spa, it's totally a crisis. You're going to have to respond to a shooting happening, right? If you're the person who sold the gun to this person, you're going to have to talk about it. If you are an Asian American hate group that's based in Atlanta, this is a crisis. People are expecting, and they're going to call you. That's the most important thing, is in a crisis, you are likely to get a call and have to explain yourself. So for all of those people, this is an actual crisis. They are going to go. Like, people are going to call them. People are going to want to know answers. Your board has demands. It's a crisis. But for a lot of groups, it's also potentially rapid response. Somebody asked me, how do you never waste a good crisis? So some organizations, and if you followed this, you might have noticed that groups that really want to talk about Asian hate being on the rise used this crisis. So they chose to use this as a rapid response moment. So if you are a gun violence group, you may choose to weigh in here. If you are an Asian American anti-hate group, you may choose to be in here. If you are a violence against women organization, you could choose to come in here. And when I say choose, it might be that you literally are like, is it strategic or not? Do we think we can actually, really use this to help achieve our mission and help with the healing of this community and on this issue and decrease violence? But you could also get pushed. Like people could be like, we should totally be, right? Your staff could say, we need to be doing this. Your board could be saying it. Your funders could be saying it. Like, where are you? Why aren't you on here? And so it's really important to know for rapid response, what does it mean you're choosing? And again, we know the kinds of things that might happen, and whether they're negative like this case or an opportunity, we want to know, we want to take advantage of that. So again, many of you may have been called upon to actually talk about when Israel was attacked by Hamas and then retaliated, to make a comment. And so hopefully you thought about that before. Do you comment on wars? Do you comment on terrorism? Do you comment on potential genocide? Do you comment on humanitarian crises? Those are the things to think about. Then it's easier to apply them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. All right. So how many of you today have a crisis plan? So let's put that in the chat. So today, if I came there, you have a crisis plan. And how many of you have a rapid response plan? Like, you know what, Kristen, I do. I have a little checklist. When something happens, I know if it's going to go or not. So I'm seeing some crisis. Jane saying we do. Maybe to both, Jane, or just to one? Because crisis is different than rapid. Great. She has both. Terrific. Emergency plans, but not a communication plan. Okay. So that's what we're going to talk through today, is how much could you get ready to know that when rapid response opportunities arise or a crisis hits, you're really set up to not panic, because the best thing to do is to know what you're going to do. So let's talk about how to get that in place. So I'm going to start with rapid response, because in some ways we have more choice about it, right? Okay, so something's happening. So I break this down to, I want to know, is it related to my mission? So it's directly to be related to your mission. So just following off of the last one, right? If it's a gun rights situation or gun shooting or gun regulation, it's directly related to your mission. So if you are a gun rights group or a gun regulation group or an anti-gun violence group, a shooting relates to your mission, right? It could also directly relate to your team. Your team is directly impacted. So I've worked with organizations who, when the thing happens, folks lived right near the church where the shooting happened in Charleston, or folks lived near the temple where the shooting happened in Pittsburgh. So now your actual team is impacted, and that might make this especially relevant for you to weigh in on. And again, not necessarily because you're going to talk to the whole wide world, but at a minimum, you now need to address your staff and your team. And it can be directly related to your community, right? So even if it's not mission and it's not team, it might be that it's your community, however you define that, in which case that also might mean that you need to give rapid response and weigh in on something. Sometimes it's adjacent. So it's not right in the wheelhouse, but it's adjacent, even like I said. So I'm not an Asian American hate group or a gun violence group, but I'm a violence against women group. So that's maybe adjacent, is now I'm close. It could also be that allies are asking you to weigh in. So again, a lot of us get sign-on letters. A lot of the time they're asking us to weigh in, to bring our voice, maybe our power in with them. So even though it's not my issue, now my allies are asking me if I'll get involved. So I might have that potentially as a pressure point. And then other is just sometimes bad things happen in the world, right? Bad things happen in the world every single day. And like, if you just were going to respond to everything, you couldn't do anything else. So this is why it's so important to realize you can have a ton of empathy. You can, personally feel very sad or torn or all the things, but it also is that that's not necessarily why organizationally you'll weigh in on something, even when it feels like everybody else is. And in fact, it's kind of the great thing is to have that North Star where you're not, you're not going to do it. So the first thing you want to do for your rapid response plan is to actually anticipate what might happen and when, and why might you comment. So I would just list all of the things. A hurricane could hit. We could have climate effects. A school could fall into a sinkhole. There could be a school shooting and we work in the schools. So I want you to really think about what are all the things that might happen and why might you comment? So, and again, you're really trying to think of things that could happen that would make you feel like, I wonder if we should comment on that. So you just want to make a list, right? And the important thing to do is to decide what you will and won't comment on, and to actually share that with your team. So then people aren't waiting, like, why aren't they commenting on this? I worked with a foundation who worked on social and racial justice. And, at first they started commenting on literally every shooting that involved a Black person being shot, which made some sense, but they were Oregon based. And so over time, it was like, actually, there are other groups that are better suited than us to comment and to make statements. And really, we're only going to comment if they happen in Oregon, and this is going to be our take on it. And so really thinking about not only what issue, but in what context or in what geography you might do it. You want to think about that. And you want to tell your team so that everybody knows, listen, we are concerned about this other stuff. We get it. It's disturbing, it's upsetting. And, where we're able to use our voice, where we really think we're trusted, we're credible, people want to hear from us, because it's really important, because we have a special role to play in that moment, is going to be on these 3 or 4 issues. And that's it. And other than that, again, your staff teams, they may be talking about it, but as an organization, either addressing your team internally or addressing the external world, you're letting people know. So we know from trust research that people trust leaders who are very predictable. So I want y'all to think about that what you're trying to do is to say, this is going to be really predictable for us. And you're also letting them know, so we won't comment on this stuff. And it's not because we don't care or we're not in solidarity with those groups. We are. But that's not how we use our voice and our position in society. And here's why. So you're explaining to people, again, you're not doing it in the heat of the moment. Everybody knows in advance. And so you take time to socialize these ideas. At the same time, you have to be open to discussions about them. So sometimes something just is such a big deal. So I worked with the ACLU, and at one point they were the group that took on when the white supremacists wanted to march in Charlottesville, and they were first turned down for their permit. And so ACLU went and got them their permit because First Amendment is a very important part of their mission. So you can imagine this caused a lot of internal questioning, because they're also a group that's very committed to racial justice. And so when everything happened down there in violence and other things, they had to talk about it. So it's not like it's one and done, you'll never discuss it again. In fact, people get to participate in these things. And you might start with, we had talked about this before, and this is where we landed on this. Are there different things that we should be considering now, so that people feel like they can at least raise it again? And how do you get to raise it again? So if you have people squawking about it in the background, they're actually bringing it into a forum that's appropriate, as opposed to just being upset about it behind the scenes. And from this, I would create a checklist that guides you in the heat of the moment. Because again, it's a heated thing. These are things that, are important to us. It's relevant to our mission. It's relevant to our communities. It's relevant to, we're uniquely suited to speak on this. We have credibility here. We have standing. Keep in mind, there's not another better voice that actually we should let them have the space on that, and we should refer people over there who are interested in learning more, because we trust that organization. And then you want to set a system for responding, including approvals, messages, and what list this would go out to. So often it's interesting, people are ready to go, but then they suddenly realize, I don't have messaging around this, and it's going to take us 3 days. So you got to keep in mind the rapid response. If you're answering a week later, you're not really rapid. But again, I want to really remind everybody, refrain. If it's not something you've already thought about, if it's not something you already have messaging on, if it's not something you have lists of people that if you needed to engage, you could, or you have the social platforms to do so, or the staff meeting to do so, it's actually a sign that this isn't maybe your lane. Because like, why are you so unprepared for it? So I would definitely pause if suddenly getting it out quickly would take me some time. So this is what you're really moving to, is a system that you really understand. Okay, so let's play it out. How are we going to do this? If it's rapid response, who are we going to engage? What audiences would be important on this? What would we say? And again, if you're really reaching for the messaging, that's a sign, and it would make me pause. But in general, I want to know, like, I would want to say the following things. And then how, like, is this an internal thing? Is it external? What platforms are we sending it out to? And then I would review. Okay, this is how I would want it to play out. What do we have ready to go? So I feel like we're ready to go on this rapid response. And what would we need to get ready when we suddenly realize, I don't really have messages around that, or I don't have a great spokesperson who's going to say those messages, or I don't really know how to reach these folks that we're saying is really important. So that's how you want to be thinking about rapid response. And then I would just say, you want to follow the process. So once you have it, you are going to go get your checklist. You're going to focus on the priority audiences that you said that were important, hopefully using ready-made messages. You've confirmed the systems are in place to do what you want to do. And last, you want to create those feedback loops to know you're hitting the mark. You're doing this for a reason, and make sure, are you reassuring your community? Are you standing in solidarity with somebody who's important? So you want to make sure you have some feedback loops so that you can course correct. I had a number of clients who decided to step out on the Gaza issue, and literally one of them had to issue 3 different statements because each time they were getting a lot of pushback. So it was saying they weren't hitting the mark the way they wanted to. And then the feedback was something they took really seriously, like, oh, that's not what we meant. That's how it's coming across. Let's redo this. And you can't be afraid to go do a redo, which I know sounds kind of scary. So before I move to crisis, let me pause there and see, Judy and Carrie, are there any questions on thinking about rapid response? It's something we choose to do, but we need to choose carefully.
So Kristen, one question was, what are ways to show empathy without actually taking a stand? Because on the one slide you can show empathy without actually being out front.
Yeah. I mean, it really is just in your own personal way of being. Like, sometimes at Spitfire, we don't issue anything, but I check in on people who I know. Like, I have folks who have, Israeli relatives. I have people who have Gaza relatives, and I check in on them personally and just, hey, I know these are really difficult times for you. So, we can all use our own personal capacity of, like, folks who think that we should be standing up. It's also, if I feel like, and sometimes we hear this, like, the silence is deafening, nobody wants to be called a white moderate, and think about that, is so that people understand. Again, I always sort of point to, sometimes I'm learning, and I tell my clients, like, if they don't have a really good perspective on that issue, and I'm like, if you don't really know, like, now's not a time to necessarily do a deep dive on, like, for example, Israel and Gaza. But you might also feel like, I don't also want to feel like I'm being completely silent, and that any of this, whatever is upsetting you the most, is okay. So I think, but it's okay to say, I'm learning here. I want everybody to be safe in their own borders. And I am really learning. I am going to these groups to help me understand better, what's going on and what we might do. So it's okay to be human. Again, because you don't necessarily have a perspective on every single thing, and you don't always want to, you don't always know the solution you might want to push. And you also, frankly, don't want to sound really transactional. So I think some people, when they come out with really fast statements, can come across as really transactional, and it can be alienating to communities you might want to be, actually in community with. So, and there's also, keep in mind, we're talking about rapid response windows, which are short. You have a longer period of time for many of the issues that are facing our world if you decide to weigh in on them, and to be able to do so in a thoughtful way like you want.
And Kristen, there are a couple of other questions. Do you want to wait, or do you want to hear them?
I will take them now before we move into crisis.
Okay, here we go. How important is it, and this is from Sarah, how important is it that representatives of the community most impacted by the event have vetted the messaging? And to what extent should timing be a factor in whether you make a statement? For example, your conference is 2 days after a global disaster took place. Does that matter?
Yeah. Oh, those are good ones. I mean, in the first one, I would say even, whenever possible, I like to be co-creating with those most impacted in the messaging. So it's not even that they're vetting it, it's actually that they're part of it and creating it. I think it's so important that we give people decision-making power and not just more responsibility. So I think where you can, if you're in community, and again, don't give them new things to do when something horrible has happened. But if they're in community with you, I would make that invitation. And then for sure, if you are able to, if they're not, or they're willing to take a look at something, I would, definitely ask people who are going to have the cultural competency to think about what you're saying. And again, one nice thing to think about this is, in a lot of ways, that's work we can do in advance. So we're not asking people when we're in the heat of it. And that includes people who might be under greater emotional and other stress than we might be, depending on what's just happened. So that's what I would think about that, is I would try again, get that work done in advance so that you're feeling very confident if you've decided to step out on something, that it has in fact been considered by people who come with that lived experience. So you can't have elephants in the room. And I think that's really hard. So, if I was at a gathering right after Russia invaded Ukraine, in a lot of ways, most people wouldn't have commented on that necessarily right away, unless you were really a peace organization. But, at some point, I work with a lot of humanitarian organizations. And if Russia is now blockading, grain coming out, now it's suddenly like, wow, using food as a weapon of war is a war crime. And so people might really be feeling that and talking about it. So I think if something has happened, but again, something's happened all the time in the world. And I would just say, if it's something that's super relevant to your field and your gathering, and it might be as simple as, I know some states have outlawed being able to use the word equity, for example, in your work. So in that way, like, people might feel really on edge. They might feel like their jobs are at risk and they don't even know how they're supposed to go through the 2 days. In which case, I think you just have to say out loud how we're all feeling, without necessarily trying to reassure them or act like it's not a big deal or act like it's the biggest deal ever, because we might all still be processing it. So hopefully that helps.
And Kristen, can you go back one slide while I ask you this last slide? Estrella would like to see that. And Vanessa had a question about, when you're using templates and messages, how do you do it authentically? Because it can seem performative.
Absolutely. I think that's why the pre-work really helps. The truth is, once you tend to think through these really hard issues, so I've definitely worked on hate crimes. And so to some extent, no matter who the hate has been perpetuated on, when I work with different groups who really know how they feel about hate crimes, how unacceptable they are, why we need to enforce a lot of rules so that they don't happen, and why we need to be very aware that we are underestimating them and that most of them are rising. That doesn't change. And so what's nice is you have that bedrock to really refer to, and then you're able to think about, in this moment with what just happened, what more do I want to say? And again, it's one of those things where I always ask people, if you're about to comment on something and you don't know what your bedrock messaging is, it makes me just wonder, it can't be that central to your mission. Now, again, we all get caught with this because it could be, it's at our community, or again, our staff. Like, I had a number of people who have staff who, the makeup of the staff means you absolutely are going to need to address this, because many of them are personally impacted by it. In that case, it's worth it to sit down and really figure out what you want to say, because they're expecting that you understand that something really big just happened. But to your point, I just hate when people kind of do those fast statements and are kind of like, yeah, I got your back. But they haven't really thought about it, and they can't say much more because they haven't really thought about it. Like, all of those are signs to me of like, this isn't yours. That's not to say that in the future you don't want to be in that position, but I wouldn't feel rushed to do something anemic and inauthentic. That's what I would not do, because I think you're gonna go from rapid response to causing your own crisis because you've moved too fast and not been thoughtful.
Thanks, Kristen, and we'll save the others till later. They're going to keep coming.
Great. Keep them coming. I'm here to answer them. And also, I know there's a lot of wisdom on this call. So if you have different or better or answers to what I just said, please feel free. I know everybody's got experience in this area. So, nobody's perfect on it, and it's not cut and dry. These are hard decisions you're making. So feel free to share if you've got great experience. So I always tell people when they tell me that this is a crisis, I'm always like, I want to stop. Because again, if somebody in a very high profile way has just sued you or sued your organization, or you've been fired, like, it can feel like a crisis. It really can. And to some extent, like, if you're fired, that is a personal, like, it's not a great day. It's not going to be your favorite day that you're going to celebrate every year. But the question is it really a crisis and requires a crisis response? And so I think that's just something that we really want to consider. And I really want to make sure everybody's using this word crisis and the idea of crisis in the same way. So this is a complicated looking slide, but it is actually a really good one because it just flow charts you through it, which is to have some good questions, and you might need to tailor to your own. This is, generally it fits for a lot of organizations, but when it happens, it sort of needs to be like, will this harm your reputation? Like, is it going to harm your reputation with people you really care about? So again, I mentioned the ACLU, and certainly the staff was kind of like, what do you mean? We just went and did that. So yeah, your reputation's on the line. So yes, that's a yes. Will the impact extend beyond the organization? So a lot of times I hear things like, anytime I hear about, these parents, they got upset, they did this exercise in class, and the kid came home and they asked their parents something, and the next thing you know, like, the parents trying to like get a teacher fired or that book banned, or, and so suddenly everybody's thinking about that, like, what is my lesson plan? How are my parents feeling? So when some of these things happen, it's like, this is going to impact beyond, like, I can't just go and clean this up at the organization. Like, it's in the community, it might be in the ether. Will there be a media frenzy? So again, if it's like, oh, wow, like, the media is going to love this, and just keep in mind with what the media is covering now, will there be a backlash from partners? Did we just do something that, partners didn't like? So again, I might remove curriculum because some of my parents were upset. And the next thing I know, I've got a ton of partners who don't want us to back off the word equity. And I've just, I had to, because of the political situations I'm in. And now the partners are mad. So now the state's not mad at me, but the partners are mad at me. And that could, now suddenly, are the funders getting engaged, and are they thinking about this in some way? And people have a lot of agency on social media. So, if suddenly lots of people are going to have opinions about it, and I have to worry about that it's out there in social, and sadly, sometimes it can pose a danger or threaten harm to somebody, that because, what's being said, it's, sometimes these community meetings at city council or at ed boards or at libraries are now very tense. We have people getting doxxed when they testify before Congress. So, and we really want to think that through, that would be a crisis. I would want to go protect my team and my staff. And then, does it actually reduce trust? Like, no matter how we get out of this, at the end of the day, is it actually going to reduce trust? So as you go through this, you're kind of saying, how many yeses do I have? How many no's do I have? And hopefully the no's win. But, more importantly, you need to know that you did this correctly, and that you really thought about what the actual implications are. So if it is a crisis, it's pretty much, you need to gather the facts. So crisis is really important because, again, we're very emotional. Lots of things are like, this is happening, but actually gather the facts, like, who said what? We just got sued because we're using equity in this language and it's not allowed. And okay, so did we get sued? Who's suing us? On what grounds are they suing us? Is this a public thing? Was the filing public? Are they doing press around it? Right? I'm just gathering the facts. What's actually going on, and stop and really make sure you have a handle on it. Then presumably you have a crisis team. So you've thought about, you've anticipated your crises, and you have a crisis team. And then you want to review the plan. And I just talked about this a little bit around the messaging. Hopefully a lot of this is baked in. If this kind of thing were happening, this is what we would think we would want to do. And then you want to start monitoring. So whatever that looks like, you're getting emails in, you're getting questions, there's social media about it, there's earned media about it. Your partners are calling, they're not calling. You're really trying to make sure you have a good pulse on things. And then you want to be really clear about internal and external communication. So a lot of people don't know it, but when you're in crisis, anytime you're sending any email, et cetera, it's all discoverable. That means that if I get into any kind of litigation, media can FOIA it. If you're in certain agencies, people who might do a lawsuit can get it unless it has attorney-client privilege. So we have to be really mindful when we start dealing with crisis, especially if it's interpersonal situations, or those kinds of things. So you need to be careful about what you're putting in writing, anything, any notepads, anything like that, that can all be, requested. So you do really want to be careful as you're starting to respond, that you're not saying anything that you later don't want to see in a court document, as I like to say. So, so if you're in crisis, then, you really want to follow your plan. And it's similar in a lot of ways to rapid response, which is, you always want to be able to identify and assess risk. You want to think about, what is that opposition? What are internal vulnerabilities? Wherever you can, when you anticipate that this could happen, you want to minimize those risks. So again, if you happen to know that a staff person is going to be fired and they're going to make a really big stink about it, there are things you can do to make that a better parting of the ways. That's the best thing to do, is to say, rather than have it be like a take this job and shove it moment, we're going to minimize that risk. Or if you're introducing a curriculum and you might walk right into polarization because it mentions climate change, then, what can you be doing to showcase support from different kinds of ideologies, et cetera, and different kind of experts were brought in to help create the curriculum to minimize the risk that somebody's going to come after you. So as you think about identifying the risk, it's good to rate, what's going on. So here, we often see waste, fraud, and abuse in programs, of course. And here there was a big, big, big steal. And this is obviously a crisis for this organization, but frankly, it's a crisis for every food program that was getting these kinds of federal dollars, that they might now feel like there was extra scrutiny coming onto them. And I would start to think about, wow, do we already have people gunning for us? They hate our food program anyways, and this is giving them a wide open to come after us. What kind is your issue popular or hot on the agenda? Is it going to get greater scrutiny? Is it going to catch the attention of the media or social media? Does your organization frequently get media? Are there high profile people affiliated with your organization? So who's on your board or who's in the community that's affiliated with you? And are you affiliated with, targets of harassment or disinformation? And it's interesting, again, so many things have become polarized that some issues you would think wouldn't have this are now getting it. And then if you're an organization that doesn't have your internal systems buttoned down, that means your staff know, don't talk to media if they call on something like this. It means you could quickly call a staff meeting and explain to people what was going on in a way that was transparent and built trust. But if it's suddenly wow, we don't have any of those systems, I already have staff out there tweeting about, we got a notice from the state that we aren't allowed to use these words anymore, and they're complaining about it publicly while they're saying they're with our organization. Okay, you don't have your systems buttoned down inside. So if you look over those things though, and you can kind of say, okay, on a scale of 0 to 6, what do I have? Hopefully you're low. Hopefully a lot of those are oh, I don't really have people who have it out for us, and my systems are buttoned down, and the media is not going to get on top of this, and I'm not going to get weird calls from legislators and asked to testify. good. Then you probably don't have a lot to worry about. You start getting up into the 3 or 4, and I'd be paying attention. Like, that's enough signs that like this could become a bigger crisis. Again, whether it's that it's funder confidence, or the schools are nervous that they're partnering with us because suddenly we're in the hot seat. I'd start getting a little more proactive in that case. And of course, if you end up with a 5 to 6, then it's it's here, and you need to really take the crisis seriously and just know it's going to be roiling for a week, if not more. And again, follow the plan that you did. So like I said, if you're a food group and suddenly everybody's looking at this waste, fraud, and abuse story, you're at a 6 and it's go time for you. I do just want to emphasize again, though, that no matter the crisis, a lot of times, one, you can head crises off just by minimizing the risk ahead of time. So the more you anticipate, the easier it's going to be to say, these are all the different ways that I can minimize this. Because one thing you can't do in the middle of a crisis, of course, is get into a time machine and go back and do the things that you wish you had done. So I just really encourage people, like, what pre-work can we do? So, a lot of things are like, if I know that my team knows that they're not supposed to use the word equity or anything like that, have you actually done the training so that you can say, we have trained our people. And so even if a mistake was made or something got out, you are compliant, and you can go back and show all the things that you did to make sure that you had things in check. But I would also just say that a lot of times crisis happens when we're not buttoned up internally. It's staff morale. It's, there's been a staff tradition and it just hasn't been. So something dropped in between. So really making sure that any of those things are really buttoned up as you move forward. And like I mentioned, if there's things to be doing, to be communicating clearly so that others know what you're doing to minimize crisis, that can really help as you think about doing this. So I will say a lot of things to not do, of course, are to have a knee-jerk reaction. Again, we get really emotional if people come and attack us or question our intentions. I also tell people usually most crises are best handled behind the scenes. A public fight is often not best. You're just giving air to something. A lot of times if people are coming after you, they want you to, lose your mind in public. I also tell everybody, apologize as fast as possible. If there was a mistake made, just apologize. You'll end up apologizing anyways, but if people make you apologize, it just drives people crazy. Be really careful if you do have opposition who's come after you, is don't repeat their messaging about you. Don't ever use your airtime to make their case. And I would really just emphasize, a lot of people will come out and support you because hopefully you've got good partnerships and you've done the work that you need to do. This is one of your minimizing risk strategies. So anybody who supports you through tough times, you always really want to be able to thank them so that you know that they put their reputation on the line for you or gave you some of their muscle when you needed it. So make sure that you do remember to thank them. So let me stop there because we still have some minutes left and figure out what this is bringing up for you.
So Kristen, we do have a couple of questions. A couple were from before, but you just mentioned that one of them is that when there's a crisis, and this was Richie, that's not really your niche, but it's really affecting you personally or your staff personally. What are your ideas for how to handle that?
Yeah. So I always, first of all, try and understand, what is that feeling that you're like, why is this affecting us? But it is. So, many of you probably saw the Time's Up was a group where it was a group of women and they were very high profile and they said they believed victims. And they actually were doing great work about, sexual harassment in the workplace and other things. But at some point they get caught and they are advising a governor who has been accused of sexual misconduct. So suddenly this whole, we believe the victim, the whole thing fell apart. So not only did that organization implode, so that's them, but to the point of this question, now you suddenly have a lot of other groups that have grown up around this and are actually helping women. And what you really have to do is to know that the tarnishment and the distrust that is now going to grow because of this very high profile incident does affect you. And so I think the first thing is to say, to hit the reset of what is the moral norm that you're in agreement to. So in this case, it would be any group that's working with vulnerable women who are coming to make complaints needs to say, I want you to know, we believe you, we will never work for the perpetrator. You know, you're resetting a moral norm and expectation. So I think that that's really important to do both with your team and any partners that you have, is to come back to what the moral norm is that they can count on you for. That's a way to start building trust through what might be a time when, even if you didn't do it, that something happened in the field, and you're being held accountable for it, in which case you need to be doing the trust building work that's going to help you not get swept up into this crisis.
So 2 more questions. Well, actually 3 more questions. You ready?
I'm ready.
And so Nathan asked before, and you mentioned this a little bit, of how to balance the legal risk of speaking out to your community when the crisis is a legal one for your organization, and you may be constrained in what you can say because of an active or threatened lawsuit. How do you balance that? And do you get legal advice? What do you suggest?
Yeah. So this is funny because I feel like if you had a lawyer doing this right now, they're going to give the exact opposite answer that I'm giving. So I'm being honest about that. So I always, when I work with executives and others, and we have to be developing messaging, I say exactly what we want to say, and then I get the lawyers to approve it. If I go to the lawyers and say, what can I say? It is always don't say anything.
Yeah.
So that's my first rule of thumb, is I write if I could say anything, and then I let the lawyers take some things away. But if you start with the lawyer, their whole thing is to be risk adverse, which I totally get. But we're dealing with optical situations and live situations where, you know, you really can't just say to people, if you've been accused of gross misconduct, if people are really concerned about who you are as an organization or a leader, it's hard to say that's in litigation and I can't say anything. So again, you want to figure out whether or not you can talk about the exact incident, unlikely. But what you oftentimes can talk about is the culture that we're trying to build at this organization, is the way we think about teaching these kids in these schools is. So hopefully you can really lead with values language, even if you can't talk about these individual instances. So that's how I would think about being able to talk about that, because otherwise the lawyers will have you not saying anything. But I will also say, do not send stuff out and not check with your lawyer if you are under any legal jeopardy, because it can really cause you very significant problems.
And another question that many, especially smaller organizations, Sarah asked this, struggle with how much to engage with detractors on social media once you posted a statement. So, some people have tried to delete things, or what's your advice on that, to not make the situation worse, but also to honor that there are going to be people that disagree with you? Right.
Well, and I think that's the most interesting to really know. I often talk about people as saints, sinners, and salvageables, and that can make you label people. So you have to be careful about using it in an unelegant way. But I think you really do have to know: am I having a real conversation with this person in a way that I can set some ground rules and we can respectfully disagree? That's interesting. And actually, people like when they feel like they can participate with you in organizations and leaders that allow for participation, even when there's disagreement, are more trusted than those that don't. On the other hand, there's a point at which maybe they don't follow any ground rules. They're super insulting. They would fall under what we would call a troll. And they're just there to be disruptive. So they're no longer there to actually be engaged in constructive conversation. In which case, now you're wasting your time, because it's that old, playing with pigs in the mud. And everybody gets dirty and the pigs like it. So you do sort of have to know, like, is this an honest conversation that we're having with disagreement? Or is this the person posturing and using this platform to make points, that are not that useful? In which case, then I wouldn't engage, because a lot of times people can't engage solitarily. But if you'll engage with them, then they're gonna keep going with you. So I think it's up to you to figure that out.
Okay, one last question that I have, and I don't know if Carrie has another, is that if your organization cares deeply about equity and inclusion, it's in your mission, all of that, how do you decide what to get engaged in? Because there's, like you said, bad stuff happening every hour. And some is really bad, whether it's Sudan or the Gaza war or the Russia-Ukraine. What do you do?
Yeah, I really would lean on mission, expertise, and competence as three good anchors for, are we the right group to be doing this? So again, equity and inclusion, it just infuses everything. So I can't think of issues where I'm like, oh, has nothing to do with that. So it's going to be hard to use. That's not a great way to decide yes or no, I'm doing this. I think your mission gives you a lot better. So we're here to achieve this, and is this right in the middle of that mission? Then I think absolutely. So my first is mission. Is it mission related? First and foremost. And then the second thing is that expertise. Do we actually have expertise on this issue enough? Because again, I can be concerned about all sorts of things. I may not have a lot of expertise to offer in this moment, and I might do better to actually, be thinking about other groups that are better suited for such things. And then last is competence. I think people get frustrated when organizations, and we see this now, right, in the wake of the George Floyd murder, lots of groups, big and small, made statements and they made commitments. And we see a lot where people have not been able to necessarily go all the way through with those. So that's really disappointing to people. And so really being able to keep your promises is a very, very, very big deal. So, just you having a statement about it or you being concerned about it is not you solving something. And so I think it's another way to kind of say, hey, are we the right people to be weighing in on this right now? And again, as people, we can be doing all sorts of things to be concerned and empathetic. But as an organization, if you're going to use your voice, I would say it should be because it relates directly to your mission, which is why you're there to do the work. And there's a lot to be done. So when you say, I'm doing this instead, you're distracting away from your mission. We have the expertise to do that. And by the way, that includes cultural competency. So not just factually, I am an expert. I also have the cultural competence here. And then we are competent to actually see through whatever it is we're saying. Because otherwise you're about to shoot yourself in the foot.
Kristen, thank you so much. Do you want to say a little bit about the SMART plan and just any advice, last advice for all of us? That was fantastic.
Oh, good. Well, I hope it was helpful. And again, I know lots of people have expertise and wisdom, so, share with each other, but hopefully this gave you at least a way to think about it. That you can take small steps. And that's what I would say. The SMART plan is crisis planning, but you'll see that some of the worksheets will help you with rapid response too. It's free. You're welcome to just grab it and download it. And I think what's nice about it is it just makes it bite-sized. So if you want to start thinking about it, and again, don't think I have to think of everything that could go wrong or everything we'd want to weigh in on, and then we have to do it all at the same time. Like if you just say, I'm going to think of 3 things this week and we'll do the role play out. It's already getting you better prepared for this stuff because it's a muscle. Like at the end of the day, it's a muscle, and being able to tell your teams that you're doing it. So then again, when these big things come up and you are not going to comment on it, it's a lot easier to go back to say, hey, remember we came up with that philosophy of how we use our voice and when we weigh in. Because again, using your voice creates a lot of noise when we need attention sometimes. So it's not always helpful for you all to just everybody to comment on everything all the time. It actually creates a lot of noise and not attention.
Yep.
So sharing that with your teams can make people feel better. It's not that we're uncaring or we can't be bothered. It's that we've thought about this really strategically about where it's best for us to use our voice to make the world we all want to live in. And in the meanwhile, like, obviously we have a lot of different concerns. And we're happy to like have lunches and talk things out and stuff, but I'm not going to step out on something that's not in our mission, that we don't have a lot of expertise on, just to hear our voice. Like, that's not how we're going to approach this stuff.
Well, Kristen, thank you so much. We did have one last question come in, and we have 2 seconds here. Steve said one of the hardest parts of his job is coming up with something meaningful to say to reporters when all you can say is it's under investigation. And you know that that's, a tough thing. So what would you suggest to Steve?
Again, I always think it's a time when journalists call you, I always tell people, I'm like, you're not giving them the story they want, you're giving them the story you want to tell, and they get to choose. They're either going to tell it or not. But if you're like, there's a couple of things I can't talk about, but here's what I can talk about. Like, as a nation or as a community, we really need to be thinking about this. And I think, and now you're getting into your values and your mission and what work you're working on and what's so important about it. And ultimately, that's going to build trust, because even if you have an investigation against you, or even if you get a judgment against you, people are going to put it into the context of what you say you stand for. So I would always use opportunities to be able, and again, the journalist may be like, if you're not talking about that, then I'm not covering you. But if you are able to say, this is a tension and this is something we're having to decide as a society, if you give them something back to cover that's interesting and has the conflict that they love, but is a different conflict than the investigation, you might end up being able to start to share what you need to share.
Thank you so much, Kristen. We really appreciate all the help you've given us, and this has been fantastic. Are you willing to share your slides, the PDF, with the group?
Yes, I think I sent those to you earlier today. So I am delighted for y'all to share these. And again, a lot of what I said is in the SMART plan. And also, as everybody knows that works with Judy, I am totally happy. If you have quick questions for me, she can share my email. I am delighted. Y'all are doing such important work. And I am always happy to provide just easy counsel to folks. If you're like, hey, I'll just take a quick look at this thing. Like, I am delighted to do that. You are educating the next generation. So here for you.
You are so great. And Carrie, I'll turn it over to you to end this. Thanks so much, everyone.
Great, thank you. And again, Kristen, really phenomenal conversation today. Gave us a lot to think about, and the detailed explanation of how to make those really critical decisions when you're ahead of the event and your head is clear and calm is so important. So I'm really glad to have the instruction that you were able to give us. So I'm going to share my screen and give you all a heads up of some things coming down the pike for us. So here you've got kind of that reminder that, as always, we will be sending you along the recording of today's conversation, as well as the resources and the slides that were shared by Kristen. So stay tuned for those. You can always check that link there and follow up, and then you'll get an email with all the details as well. So keep an eye out for those. We've also got coming up the closing of the application deadline for the Natural Start Alliance's conference. So they're hosting a conference in July, and they're still taking proposals. So if you are interested in speaking at the annual nature-based early learning conference, please do submit it. It's a national gathering for new and seasoned nature-based early childhood education professionals. So there are all different types of topics you can pitch on. And if you visit conference.naturalstart.org, you'll see some suggestions for what you might pitch, more information about the event, and then also the way to submit your proposal. So we're so excited about that. We also have coming up the Natural Start webinar, which is called Multiple Language Learning in Nature-Based Classrooms. That's happening on January 30th at 3 o'clock. And you can see there's a bit.ly there for you to register if you'd like. And you'll have the opportunity to hear from researchers and program leads about how to further encourage that use of language learning in an outdoor education space. So please register for that if you're interested, and please do share the opportunity. And lastly, if you enjoyed this eeWEBINAR, we are always happy to be bringing more topics, more conversations, and more speakers through to you. So you can see here in February, we have Dr. Patricia Morgan, who is an advocate for leading with equity, inclusion, and practices that we can all put into place. So we'll be hosting her in late February. And if you scan the QR code or visit our eeWEBINARs link, keep an eye out for more details coming from that webinar. But otherwise, we are so grateful for all of you who've attended. This conversation was phenomenal. And again, Kristen, you did just such a wonderful job of giving us methodical tools, questions, ideas to think through in advance so that we can all respond as those crises, prepared or unprepared as we might feel, have that solid plan of how to proceed. So again, thank you so much.